What's better than visiting one of the oldest cemeteries in America during the Halloween season?
Nothing. Literally nothing.
Join us as we explore the history and impact of the old burying point at the Charter Street Cemetery in Salem. Hi, I'm Phoebe.
I'm Adam.
We're the couple behind In the Great Wide, and we visited Salem during our month-long Amtrak USA Rail Pass adventure across the U.S. and back when we were traveling only by train. And we wanted to visit Salem, which has been on our list for a long time because we're both fascinated by the Salem witch trials.
Yeah.
But Salem during the Halloween season, not the best experience.
Yeah, it was terribly disappointing. We were not prepared for the overwhelming commercialization that really takes away from the impact of Salem and the witch trials.
And the fact that 19 people were literally murdered by their neighbors.
Yeah, it was very odd, and
there's a fine line between celebrating witchcraft now in a place that has such historical significance to witches versus exploiting it for profit. And unfortunately, I feel like the city of Salem is exploiting it.
Yeah, I mean, the history is still there. We went to a really great exhibit at the Peabody, the Essex Museum, which is the oldest museum in the country, I believe.
Second oldest.
Oh, second oldest museum in the country. That still makes it real old.
Yes.
It was a great exhibit about the witch trials. Everything that was in this exhibit was stuff that people that were involved in the witch trials had touched and used either on a daily basis or had written notes, like journal pages, or there was furniture. There was like a cane from one of the trial judges. Mm-hmm. There was like a big part of somebody's house, like a window, like from somebody's house.
It was really cool, but it was a temporary exhibit, unfortunately, and it's no longer there, which I really think they should make that permanent.
Yeah, you'd think in the place where it happened that they'd want to push that more, but the city of Salem kind of heavily regulates how the city of Salem is viewed by the outside public.
But that exhibit did enhance our experience in Salem
Totally.
A lot.
Yeah, a lot. It was the first thing we did, and we hung out there and to get the feel for what it actually was. Because I would argue that a lot of people that go to Salem don't even really know anything about the witch trials.
Not about what they actually were. You know, you learn about them in grade school, at least in the United States we do. But obviously, they're not going to tell you the full story there. So,
of course not.
But anyway, the old burying point, also known as the Charter Street Cemetery or the Central Burying Point, it's right behind the Peabody Essex Museum. Yeah.
It was first referenced to as a burial site in 1637. The oldest cemetery in America is debated. It can get a little weird because technically there were burial grounds that used to be like indigenous Americans' burial grounds that they then turned into their own. So there's argument about what is the oldest cemetery in the country. The oldest that we could find is King's Chapel Burying Point in Boston, which was founded in 1630.
So this one is almost as old as that. It's only 7 years shy, according to records, of being the oldest cemetery in the United States.
We love wandering around old cemeteries. They're beautiful, they're peaceful, they're very humbling. One of the best times we had in Edinburgh was this random little cemetery that was next to this chapel, and it was so old. I mean, some of the gravestones were like almost 500 years old. Like, it's crazy.
Older than the country we live in.
Yeah. I mean, it's
insane.
Weird. Like, it's super weird.
Yeah. Plus, we're both history nerds, so, you know, old cemeteries tick a lot of boxes for us.
It does.
All I'm saying.
They do. Yeah. They do. They really do.
Yeah. And the oldest known gravestone in the old burying point is the Cromwell stone, which dates to 1673 when Dorothy Cromwell,
I'm guessing her name is.
When she passed away. And her husband's stone is also in the cemetery nearby and dates to 1693.
Now, we said that it was first being used as a burial place in 1637, and if the earliest is 1673, what happened to all the other gravestones? Well, Apparently, back then, the English tradition was to make grave markers from wood, and surprise, surprise, wood deteriorates and doesn't stick around. So for that good 40-some years, there just wasn't any.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or there aren't any anymore.
There aren't any anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, nobody died during that time. It's fine. It's fine. It was a great time to be alive.
And there are also a few tombs in the old burying point that contain a bunch of corpses. It's strange because
it's super weird.
You walk by them having no idea what they are. But luckily, we had a tour guide who later on told us that they are literally just these deep holes that are partially filled with water, and they have like a stone slab on the top, and they would just take the slab off, put a corpse in, no coffin or anything, just put the corpse in, and then put the stone slab back on. And let the body deteriorate.
Just do this over and over and over. They're big enough where they look like it would like fit a person. But what you don't realize is that below that, they go way down, like 30 feet. And so they're just dumping bodies in, one after another.
And there are a few famous people buried at the cemetery, such as Richard Moore, who is the only passenger from the Mayflower with a documented gravesite.
So as far as we know, he's the only one that actually came across on the Mayflower. Simon Bradstreet was one of the founders and a governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony.
And then there's Mary Corey, who is the second wife of Giles Corey, who was pressed to death during the Salem witch trials.
Yeah, Giles Corey. We're going to do a whole video about him at some point because that man was fascinating.
Yeah.
John Hawthorne, magistrate involved in the Salem witch trials, who is also an ancestor of Nathaniel Hawthorne, author of The Scarlet Letter, which most of us Americans had to read in school, if you actually did your homework, which I did not.
I didn't read all of the assigned readings in school, I'm not going to lie, but that one I did read.
Really?
I remember...
Of all of them, that was the one that you chose?
I remember being fascinated by the vocabulary because I couldn't get through a paragraph without coming across a word I didn't know.
That's precisely what turned me off to it. I was like, nope, too flowery for me. Moving on. Go and get my comic books.
Yeah, fair. But you should note that none of the accused witches from the Salem witch trials are buried at this old
Charter
burying
Street
point.
Cemetery, yeah.
Because they were not allowed Christian burials.
Yes.
They were buried instead in a pit by the gallows.
Stories claim that family members would sometimes come back to claim the bodies of their loved ones in the dark of night, give them a proper Christian burial.
Yeah.
Because, surprise, not everybody agreed with the decisions of the judges who were not trained as judges or had any law experience at all.
It's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
Yeah.
The cemetery is smaller than you would expect. They only had so much space back then. And it is still beautiful. Just do yourself a favor and don't go in October.
Yeah. We met some local friends. They came up from Boston and walked around the Salem Witch Trials Memorial, which is dedicated to the 19 lives lost, which is just outside the cemetery, which was actually put in the 90s, I think. Then we decided to go to the cemetery itself, but there was a line to get into a cemetery.
Yeah, it was shocking, if I'm being honest. The cemetery is 385 years old, so a lot of people walking through could damage significantly the site and the tombstones and everything. So it makes sense that the city should regulate how many people can go in at once. And they did also tell us that we had to stay on the path. We couldn't walk between the tombstones. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But it also just felt like a lot of people who were going through there just did not care.
No, and it didn't even seem like they were really even looking at the stuff. They were just going through and wandering through, walking off the path, and it makes sense. I mean, it really comes down to the fact that they know there's going to be 100,000 people coming through, so they have to limit how many people because they don't have the staff to have twice that many walking through the cemetery, because inevitably the people that show up there just don't care, and they'll try to knock over the tombstones and stuff. Like it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating.
Sad. It's super sad.
Yeah.
But it just added exponentially to the feeling that Salem is just a tourist trap now.
Yeah.
But the Grimshawe House is adjacent to the cemetery, which is where Nathaniel Hawthorne wooed his future wife, Sophia Peabody, who actually opened the first kindergarten in America.
The house was built in 1770, and it and the cemetery are featured in a number of Hawthorne's works, which I don't know because I've never read any.
I've only ever read The Scarlet Letter. Sorry.
The Pickman House, which is practically in the cemetery, was built in 1669, but ended up somehow being built around and forgotten about, so no one knew it was there until it was rediscovered during landscaping renovations in the 1960s, well intact thanks to the protection of the exterior building that was built around it.
This is crazy to me.
Yeah.
First off, who built around it? Who was like, yeah, we're going to build a building around this building?
Yeah, why?
What was the purpose of it? What was the building for?
Why wouldn't you try to tear it down?
Very strange.
Doesn't make any sense.
I mean, it worked out well for us now in modern day times, because the building is still so well preserved.
Right.
It's just very strange, the history of this building.
It's very weird. It was purchased by the Peabody Essex Museum 20 years later in the 1980s, and there is now a gift shop inside because, I bought peppermints. I
Very
bought
nice
really
peppermints.
Nice peppermints from one of the oldest candy companies in the country.
Yeah. They weren't just like peppermints that you'd buy at Walmart.
No, it was handmade peppermints.
And the cemetery is believed to be haunted. We actually found it listed on a most haunted places in America list, but we never saw any ghosts.
No.
And but a lot of Salem is haunted, given their sordid past. So just keep your eyes peeled.
Yeah, we took a guided night walking tour around Salem and heard stories about the Pickman House having faces peer out of windows, and then how a Mexican restaurant that's like behind the cemetery, there was a flood and coffins just broke through the hill and like went into their basement and just filled their basement with coffins and corpses.
Lovely. Exactly what you're looking for in a restaurant.
But we will be talking more about that in our video next Tuesday.
So the rich history of Salem was really what drew us there.
Yeah.
And the fascination with how and why the witch trials could have happened at all in the first place.
It really seems like Salem, for the most part, has lost a lot of respect for its history and instead is exploiting it to make money.
And Salem is one of the few places that we've traveled to that I'm very sad to say I would be hesitant to return to, because I looked forward to visiting Salem specifically in October in the Halloween season for really as long as I can remember, because I've always been fascinated by the witch trials. So I was incredibly disappointed to see what the city is now. And I won't say that you shouldn't go, but just don't go in October. And hopefully that'll give you a better experience than what we had.
The history of Salem is so prominent to our country, more so than I think most people realize. And this cemetery would be an excellent place to reflect on it when it's not crowded with people who are just looking for something fun to do for the Halloween season.
So like we said, next week we'll be talking about the ghost walking tour we did that night in Salem, which was a much better experience than what we had there during the day. So make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit the bell so you'll be notified when we release it.
We post new videos every Tuesday and Thursday.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the Great Wide somewhere.